Have you ever caught yourself scrolling through your phone and suddenly realized that an hour has just vanished? You know that feeling, right? Just one more video, just one more scroll, and before you know it, it's 2 a.m. Well, today we're going to dive deep into something fascinating that's happening inside your brain during these moments, and trust me, it's way more interesting than you might think. You see, there's this incredible chemical messenger in your brain called dopamine. Now, I bet you've heard about it, the feel-good chemical, right? But here's the thing, everything you think you know about dopamine might actually be wrong. Did you know that right now, every time your phone buzzes, your brain is actually going through the exact same process as someone pulling the lever on a slot machine in Vegas? Literally, the same neural pathways are lighting up. Pretty wild, right? Here's what's really interesting and kind of scary. Recent studies have shown that our brains are becoming rewired by our digital habits in ways that would have been unimaginable just 20 years ago. And the craziest part, most of us have no idea it's even happening. Today, we're going to explore exactly what's going on up there in your brain, why it's so hard to put down that phone, and most importantly, how you can take back control of your own reward system. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never look at your phone notifications the same way again. You ready? Let's dive in. All right, let's break this down in a way that'll actually make sense. You know how everyone talks about dopamine as the pleasure chemical? Well, that's not exactly right, and this mistake is huge when it comes to understanding why we do what we do. Think of dopamine more like, you know that feeling when you're about to eat your favorite food? That excitement, that anticipation? That's dopamine. It's not actually the pleasure itself. It's more like the wanting system of your brain. Pretty different from what you've been told, right? Let me give you a real-world example. You're sitting there working and suddenly you smell someone making coffee. Your brain immediately perks up, right? That's dopamine in action. It's not the satisfaction of drinking the coffee. It's that moment when you first smell it and think, oh man, I need that coffee. Here's where it gets really interesting. Your brain has this incredible system. Think of it like a reward thermostat. Just like how your home thermostat keeps the temperature balanced, your brain tries to keep your dopamine levels balanced too. And this system, it's incredibly adaptable. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. When we constantly bombard our brain with high dopamine activities, like endless social media scrolling or binge watching shows, something fascinating happens. Your brain actually starts to turn down its sensitivity to dopamine. It's like, imagine if you've been listening to music on full volume all day. After a while, normal volume just doesn't feel loud enough anymore. This is what scientists call downregulation. Fancy word, I know, but stick with me here. It basically means your brain is saying, whoa, this is too much stimulation. Let's dial down our response. The problem? When this happens, normal everyday pleasures start feeling kind of boring. You see where I'm going with this? That's exactly why it becomes harder and harder to feel satisfied with simple things like reading a book or having a quiet conversation when we're constantly hitting our brains with these super stimulating activities. But here's the good news, and this is really important. This system is incredibly flexible. Just as it can be pushed in one direction, it can also be readjusted. Your brain has this amazing ability to reset itself. We just need to understand how to work with it, not against it. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next, how modern technology is affecting this delicate balance in ways we never expected. So we've just talked about how our brain's reward system works, but now let's get into something really fascinating. What happens when we take this ancient brain system and drop it into our modern, hyper-stimulating world? Think about this for a second. Our brains evolved over millions of years, designed to get excited about things that helped us survive. Finding food, making social connections, learning new skills. But now, we're giving these same circuits a fire hose of stimulation they were never designed to handle. Let me paint you a picture of what's happening in your brain right now. Every time you check your phone, and studies show we do this about 150 times a day on average, your brain gets a tiny squirt of dopamine, not because you found food or made a meaningful connection, but because, well, someone liked your photo or sent you a message. Here's where it gets really interesting. Your brain can't tell the difference between a notification and finding something valuable in the real world. To your brain, a like on social media hits the same circuits as finding a berry bush would have for our ancestors. Pretty wild, right? But here's the problem, and it's a big one. When we constantly stimulate these circuits with artificial rewards, our brain starts doing something pretty dramatic. Remember that downregulation we talked about? Well, in the modern world, it's happening on a scale we've never seen before. Let me give you an example that'll blow your mind. Scientists have found that heavy social media users show brain patterns similar to, get this, people with substance dependencies. Not because social media is inherently bad, but because we're basically giving our brain's reward system a workout it was never meant to handle. Think of it like this. It's as if we've taken a car engine designed for regular gas and we're constantly filling it with rocket fuel. Sure, it'll run, but eventually something's gonna have to give. And you know what's happening? Our brains are literally rewiring themselves to expect this constant high-level stimulation. That's why so many people find it hard to sit through a long movie without checking their phone, or why reading a book can feel kind of boring compared to scrolling through TikTok. But here's something even more concerning. This constant stimulation is affecting our ability to focus, our patience, even our capacity for deep thinking. You ever notice how it's getting harder to concentrate on one thing for a long time? That's not just you. That's your brain adapting to this new environment. The really fascinating part is that this isn't just affecting adults. Kids who are growing up in this environment, their brains are developing entirely different patterns of attention and reward processing. We're literally seeing the evolution of the human brain happen in real time, and not necessarily in a good way. But don't worry, I'm not here to tell you to throw your phone away and go live in the woods. What we need is understanding and balance. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. How our brain's incredible ability to change and adapt can actually be our greatest tool for taking back control. Now, here's where things get really exciting, because despite everything we've talked about, your brain has this amazing superpower. It's called neuroplasticity. Fancy word, right? But it simply means your brain can change and adapt at any age. Think of your brain like, you know those paths that form in a park when people keep walking the same way? The more people walk that path, the more defined it becomes. Your neural pathways work exactly the same way. Every time you repeat a behavior, you're basically creating and deepening these paths in your brain. Here's the cool part. Just like you can create new paths in that park, you can create new neural pathways in your brain. And the old ones, they don't disappear completely, but they can get a bit overgrown when you stop using them. Pretty neat, right? Let me share something fascinating from research. Scientists found that when people start changing their habits, their brain activity actually starts shifting in as little as 21 days. Think about that. In just 3 weeks, you can start rewiring your brain's reward system. But here's where most people get it wrong, and this is super important. They try to make these changes through pure willpower. That's like trying to paddle upstream in a strong current. Sure, you might make some progress, but you're fighting against your brain's natural tendencies. Instead, let's talk about something I call environmental engineering. See, your brain is constantly picking up cues from your environment. These cues are like little triggers that tell your brain what to expect next. When you see your phone light up, that's a cue. When you smell coffee in the morning, that's another cue. Here's a mind-blowing experiment they did. They took a group of people who were struggling with phone addiction and made one simple change. They turned their phone displays to grayscale. Just that one change reduced their screen time by an average of 40%. Why? Because they removed the colorful dopamine triggers that their brains were responding to. But it gets even better. Your brain doesn't just respond to obvious cues, it's picking up on everything: the time of day, your location, who you're with, even your posture. Each of these can become either a trigger for positive habits or, well, not so positive ones. Let me give you a personal example. I used to automatically reach for my phone every time I sat down on my couch. It was like my hand had a mind of its own. Then I realized my brain had created a strong association between couch and phone time. So I made a simple change. I started keeping a book where I usually put my phone. Within a few weeks, my automatic response changed from reaching for my phone to reaching for the book. This is the power of understanding how your brain forms habits. It's not about fighting against your brain's natural tendencies, it's about working with them. Creating environments and situations that make good habits easier and less desirable habits harder. Think about it like this. Your brain is like a garden. You can't force plants to grow, but you can create the right conditions: good soil, water, sunlight. Similarly, you can't force new habits, but you can create the right conditions for them to develop naturally. And here's the most exciting part. Once you understand these principles, you can apply them to literally any habit you want to change. Whether it's spending less time on social media, eating healthier, or building a regular exercise routine, it all comes down to understanding and working with your brain's natural tendencies. But knowing all this leads us to an important question. How do we actually put this knowledge into practice? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. Practical strategies for regulating your dopamine system in our modern world. All right, now we're getting to the good stuff, how to actually take control of your dopamine system. But before we dive in, I want you to remember something crucial. This isn't about eliminating dopamine or pleasure from your life. It's about optimizing your brain's reward system. Let me start with something that might surprise you. The most effective way to regulate your dopamine isn't through restriction, it's through balance. Think of your brain's reward system like a musical equalizer. We're not trying to turn all the levels down, we're trying to find the perfect mix. Here's your first practical strategy, and it's a game changer. I call it the dopamine scheduling technique. Instead of trying to resist high dopamine activities, you schedule them. Here's why this works so brilliantly. When you know you have Instagram time scheduled for 7 p.m., your brain stops that constant, maybe I should check it now, loop. Let me give you a real-world example. Say you're studying or working on something important. Rather than fighting the urge to check your phone every few minutes, you tell yourself, I'll check it at the top of every hour. What happens is fascinating. Your brain actually relaxes and stops craving that check-in because it knows exactly when it's coming. Now, here's strategy number 2, and this one's really interesting. It's called dopamine stacking. The idea is to pair high dopamine activities with lower dopamine but beneficial activities. For example, only listening to your favorite podcast while exercising, or only watching Netflix while folding laundry. But here's the really cool part about dopamine stacking. Over time, your brain starts associating that less exciting activity with the pleasure of the more exciting one. It's like teaching your brain to enjoy vegetables by always serving them with your favorite sauce. Now, let's talk about something that might seem counterintuitive. Controlled boredom. Yes, you heard that right. Think about it. When was the last time you just sat and did nothing? No phone, no TV, no book, just sitting with your thoughts. Here's why this matters. Short periods of boredom actually help reset your dopamine system. It's like giving your taste buds a break so they can better appreciate flavors again. Start small, maybe just 5 minutes a day of doing nothing. It feels weird at first, but trust me, it's like a reset button for your brain. Strategy number 4 is what I call environmental design, and it's crazy effective. Remember how we talked about cues and triggers? Well, This is where we put that knowledge to work. The key is to make high dopamine activities require just a little bit more effort. For example, instead of having social media apps on your home screen, move them to a folder on the second page. Or better yet, delete them and only access through your browser. Sounds too simple to work, right? But studies show that adding just 20 seconds of friction to an activity can reduce its occurrence by up to 70%. Here's another powerful strategy, the dopamine fasting light. Now, forget what you've heard about extreme dopamine fasting. That's not what we're talking about here. Instead, we're gonna do something much more sustainable. Choose one day a week where you dial down the intensity of your stimulation. Maybe on Sundays, you stick to activities that are less dopamine intense. Reading instead of gaming, walking instead of scrolling, cooking instead of ordering delivery. The goal isn't to eliminate pleasure, it's to help your brain remember how to enjoy simpler things. And here's the best part. When you start implementing these strategies, something amazing happens. Your brain begins to recover its sensitivity to everyday pleasures. That cup of coffee starts tasting better, a simple conversation becomes more engaging, a walk in the park feels more refreshing. But now you might be wondering, how do you actually put all this into practice without feeling overwhelmed? Well, that's exactly what we're going to cover next, how to turn these strategies into actual, doable habits. Okay, let's take everything we've learned and turn it into a super simple 7-day action plan. Don't worry, we're gonna start small and build up, because remember, just like a muscle, your dopamine regulation needs to be trained gradually. Here's what your first week of dopamine awareness looks like, and I want you to think of this as an experiment. You're not failing or succeeding, you're just collecting data about your own brain. Day 1 is all about awareness. Here's your only job. Notice when you reach for your phone. That's it. Don't try to change anything yet. Just notice. Keep a little note on your phone. What triggered you? Were you bored, anxious, just habit? This is like creating a map of your dopamine triggers. Day 2, we're gonna play with time boundaries. Pick 1 hour of your day, maybe 9 to 10 a.m., and make it a low dopamine hour. During this time, no social media, no videos, no games, just slower, calmer activities. It might feel uncomfortable at first, and that's actually perfect. That discomfort is your brain's reward system recalibrating. By day 3, we're ready for some environment hacking. Remember those triggers we noticed on day 1? Now we're going to adjust them. Move your phone charger to a different room. Put a book where you usually keep your phone. Small changes, big impact. Days 4 and 5 are about replacement behaviors. Every time you catch yourself reaching for a high dopamine activity, I want you to have a replacement ready. Craving social media? Take 3 deep breaths first. Want to check your notifications? Do 5 jumping jacks. Sounds silly? Maybe, but it works. Day 6 is when we introduce dopamine scheduling. Pick 2 times during the day for your high stimulation activities. The key here, stick to those times. When you're tempted outside those windows, remind yourself, not now, but later. This isn't about denial. And day 7, that's your first dopamine reset light day. Remember, we're not going extreme here. Just dial everything down a notch. Choose slower paced activities. Maybe spend some time in nature, cook a meal from scratch, have a real conversation. The beautiful thing about this approach, it's sustainable. We're not trying to become monks. We're just learning to be the DJs of our own brain chemistry. But I know what some of you are thinking, what about all those common questions and concerns? Well, that's exactly what we're going to address next. Let's tackle some of those burning questions I know are running through your mind right now. And trust me, these are the same questions I get all the time. First up, do I need to quit social media completely? Short answer, absolutely not. Remember, we're not demonizing technology here. It's not about quitting, it's about regaining control. Think of it like eating. You don't need to quit food to have a healthy diet, right? Here's another popular one. Will my dopamine levels ever return to normal? The amazing thing about your brain is it's always ready to adapt. Your dopamine system can start showing signs of rebalancing in as little as 7 days. That's how incredible your brain is at healing itself. What if I slip up and binge on social media? Listen, slipping up is not failing, it's learning. Every time you notice yourself getting pulled into old patterns, that's actually a win because you're building awareness. Remember, we're playing the long game here. And my personal favorite is dopamine actually bad for us? No. Dopamine isn't the villain here. It's like blaming water for floods. Dopamine is essential for motivation, learning, and feeling good. We're just learning to work with it better. Last but not least, how long does it take to see results? Here's the truth. Some people notice changes in their first week, others take a month. But here's what I can promise you. Every small step you take toward better dopamine regulation is making a difference, even if you can't see it yet. Now, as we wrap this up, let me share something really important about making these changes stick. Remember when we started this journey, talking about that moment when you catch yourself mindlessly scrolling? Well, now you understand what's actually happening in your brain during those moments. And more importantly, you know what to do about it. Here's the thing, your brain's reward system isn't your enemy. It's more like a really enthusiastic puppy that just needs some training. And now you have the tools to start that training. The most powerful takeaway I want you to remember is this. You're not at the mercy of your dopamine system. You can work with your brain instead of fighting against it. Every time you make a conscious choice about how you engage with technology, you're literally rewiring your neural pathways. Start small. Maybe tomorrow morning, instead of reaching for your phone first thing, take 3 deep breaths instead. That's it. That's your first step toward reclaiming control of your attention and your life. And hey, if you found this information helpful, make sure to hit that subscribe button because next week, we're diving into something even more fascinating, how dopamine shapes our relationships and social connections. Until then, remember, your brain is always ready to change. You just need to show it the way.